During today's podcast, I'm talking with Robin Auld, who has worked for and with a broad selection of leading brands, including Domino's Pizza, Topps Tiles, Chips Ahoy, Coca-Cola, Unilever and dozens more. Robin talks to me about his last 10 years as a marketing consultant and how he believes that marketing is now more science than art. Robin, with a number of high-profile B2C food and drink brands featured in your career, as well as some involvement in startups, which area do you find the most stimulating and why?
It's really interesting because I used to always want to work on young, innovative, high-growth brands where perhaps they felt either a little bit edgy or a little bit disruptive. Subsequently, as I've sort of spent a little bit longer in the industry, what you find out is that you can have the most amazing, interesting projects in really quite staid brands. Equally, you may work for the kind of, the funnest, coolest brands in the world, but be incredibly limited by what you can do. And therefore, what I've kind of found is that it's not so much the type of brand you work with or the type of industry you work with, it's the people you work with that really make the difference. And some people really want you to sort of come to the party with some creativity and innovation and out of the box thinking. I hate that term, but it's true. And they're actually really fun projects to work on. Other people want you to operate in a very strict set of parameters, which can feel more constrained. So actually, I've kind of given up trying to guess which areas or which projects would be either most interesting or most productive. It's really all down to the people.
You mentioned those high growth brands. Are those the kind of companies that have got more energy and passion about things, or would you say that's across all the brands you deal with?
I think all the brands have got a degree of energy and passion. I think some organizations, the cultures really pride themselves on having people that are very driven and very engaged with either with the product or the service they're offering. So they attract people that really want to kind of go that extra mile and take great pride in working extremely hard to deliver against the marketing objectives. So you do find, and that energy tends to be in younger, smaller companies, and often those who have got mission statements that are perhaps about changing the world or about really kind of trying to improve things for people, as opposed to perhaps a company that very simply but very honestly wants to produce products and sell it to consumers.
And in those kind of brands, do you get involved with the CEO, or is there already a marketing director or a VP of marketing in those businesses?
In smaller companies, there often is either a head of marketing or a marketing VP, but honestly, the CEO often tends to be really involved. Clearly, the smaller the company, potentially, the bigger stake a CEO has in terms of equity or ownership. And often those really small startup companies will be driven by one or two key people. And in a lot of cases, that's the CEO or it's the operations director or the chairman that really kind of drive that excitement, that will to win, that energy in the business. And I find that you can almost tell it when you walk into a business, when you walk into a company, what the energy is like by the type of people that are there, the way they're engaging with each other. And really, one of the things I've often found is the noise level is a great indicator. You walk into a small company and the noise level's high. Typically, it means there's a lot of work being done. There's a lot of passion there. And that culture comes directly from the CEO in I'd say 9 times out of 10.
So in what you're doing seems to be a combination of strategy, tactical, and also some mentoring along the way as well to be able to get the most out of people.
Mm.
Would you say there's a stronger element of one of those or the other?
I would, yeah. I think everyone's got their individual styles. For me, I really like mentoring people. I really like working with them and helping them to understand and internalize what works and what doesn't. In my experience, I have an idea of what I think works and an approach that I think is relatively straightforward and can be picked up by lots of people. But me just telling someone that wouldn't work. And what you have to do is work with someone so that they see the benefit of that themselves and internalize those views and opinions and way of working. And I think overall it's about, as I say, working collaboratively with people and mentoring them. I think is a great way of doing that. If they see me as a way that they can improve their performance and indeed their longer term career prospects, they're much, much more likely to listen than perhaps a slightly more confrontational way of working.
So in earlier discussions, you and I discussed about marketing was a science, and you believe that marketing was a science, and I kind of aired my view it was a balance between science and art. Could you explain why you think that marketing is so much more science than an art?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I started my career in lots of different businesses, but it was really honed at Domino's Pizza, where I was both sales and marketing director. And I've always had a very commercial approach to marketing. And my view, quite strongly, is that investment you make in marketing should have a return on that investment. And that return needs to be measured to understand the effectiveness of it. Marketing is about changing behavior, changing consumer behavior, or influencing it at the very least. And as a result, you need to have a very clear understanding of who it is that you're trying to reach, what is the behavior you're trying to affect, and over what timeline. And in marketing, almost anything you do will have some sort of impact. And it's understanding the things you can do to make a difference. I used to describe it to some of my clients as it's a bit like being a safe cracker. You're there with your ear to the safe and you've got the tumblers in your hand and you're turning it back and forth, waiting for them to click into place. And there are things that you can do that will have hugely disproportionate effects. The importance of that is to almost take a scientific approach to it. So to almost leave your ego at the door and to look and think, okay, there are lots of different ways now we can communicate with our customers to affect this change. Let's try and look at what's happened in the past, what we can do to try and influence that campaign, and then to measure it. So whether that's doing things like A/B testing online to look at different hierarchies and different structures, whether it's looking at different spot times or different length times of TV advertising. I mean, there's a million and one different ways of doing it. But I think marketing is endlessly fascinating. And people that I've met that have what I would call a scientific approach are often incredibly successful because they're endlessly looking for ways to continually improve. And the only way they know whether they improve or not is almost by continually kind of tweaking and tinkering and changing to continually improve that responsiveness of that marketing communication. A lot of brands do what I call vanity marketing. They're just doing marketing because they think they ought to, or because, God forbid, someone senior thought it was a good idea and should do it. And because it has some effect, then they consider it a success. And I think in marketing, it's really easy for the ego to get in the way. And I think the scientific approach to marketing takes a very different view, which is we can make some educated guesses, but we know nothing until it's actually live. And that continual consumer feedback is the fuel that drives the marketing decision making. I think it's a way that I've seen be effective across lots of different industries and lots of different brands.
I think I have to partly agree with you. I think definitely there is a science element of it around marketing, especially now when you look at social sciences, when you look at behavioral emotions and things like that of how people behave in certain aspects.
Sure.
But I also think there's the art about it to make it work. And having been a sales and marketing director and a sales director in the past myself, I understand the ROI element of it. If you spend $1, you've got to get X times number of dollars back in return. Otherwise, you should be doing something different. So I think I agree with you overall, but I think there are some nuances in there, which means that you still need that creative, you still need that understanding of people and how people behave, which I would see as more of an art rather than an exact science. But I think there's definitely, it's changed over the last 20 years or so since I've been doing marketing. It's very much around the return on investment.
I think it's a very valid point you make, and I wouldn't disagree at all. I think the art comes into tweaking, changing, morphing the communication, or tonally, tiny tweaks can make such a big difference. And it's incredible. And I think you're right. Ultimately, it is a balance between the two. I absolutely concede that. I think what I tend to find is that marketeers need some balls, and naturally.
You're listening to the shortened version of this podcast. To listen to the full version, visit your favourite podcast player and search for Webtrends Optimize or The Big Lift.